In 5th century BC, there were two philosophers in Abdera, an ancient Greek city in northern Greece. They were Democritus and Protagoras. Protagras was originally a porter who carried wood for others. He must have left quite an impression, as when Democritus first saw him, he asked Protagras to become his student. Then, Protagras left his load of wood on the road and followed Democritus. After that, he began learning rhetoric from Democritus. But after a while, Protagras realized that Democritus was going in a different way from himself. So, he decided to leave Democritus and go on his own path. What was the decisive difference between Protagras and Democritus? And what does that have to do with the history of Western philosophy? That is the story for today. Ancient Athens was a society where only the eloquent could survive. In order to succeed politically, you had to be a good speaker. Not only that, but there were many lawsuits in Athens. In ancient Greece, there were about 500 jurors in each trial. So winning a trial required an accurate understanding of the law, logical reasoning, and argumentative skills to convince the jury. And so there were people who taught argumentation, rhetoric, and how to win arguments. Protagras was one of the first philosophers to teach these things for money. There's an interesting story about Protagras. One day, a young man came to see Protagras and asked him to teach him how to win a trial. But the problem was that the young man didn't have any money. He promised to pay the tuition later if he finished his studies and won the first trial. Protagras accepted the terms and signed a contract with the young man. So to speak, he accepted the tuition on credit. But even after taking the classes, the young man didn't take on any trials. Being angered, Protagras sued his student to pay the tuition. So a trial was held, Protagras versus his student. At the trial, Protagras argued that the young man has to pay the tuition either way, because if Protagras won the trial, he would receive tuition according to the judgment, and if he lost the trial, he would receive the tuition according to the terms of the contract. The contract said if the young man won his first trial, he would pay the tuition. Then the young man said that he doesn't have to pay tuition either way, because if the young man won the trial, he wouldn't have to pay tuition according to the judgment. And if he lost the trial, he wouldn't have to pay according to the terms of the contract. Protagras says this: if a person from the tropics came here, he would say it's cold here. If a person from the Arctic came here, she would say it's hot here. So, is it cold or hot here? The answer is both. It can be both hot or cold. It depends on the person who says it. It is true that this room is cold for someone from the tropics, and it is just as true that this room is hot for someone from the Arctic. And while beef is consumed in most cultures, Hindus don't eat meat. Then is eating beef good or bad? The answer is that it can be good and bad. Normative judgments like being good or bad depends on the person who says it. Not only perceptive judgments like being cold or hot, but normative judgments like being good or bad are subjective. That's why Protagoras said, man is the measure of all things, because every man views the world and judges it from his own point of view. There is no such thing as the absolute truth. Every truth is subjective. But why did Protagoras think that the truth is subjective? We can't know what he thought, but maybe it's because he was paid to teach how to win lawsuits. What was important to him was not the truth, but winning the lawsuit. That may be why he thought that the truth is subjective. We mentioned that Protagoras went on a different path from Democritus. Let's see what the difference was. From Thales to Democritus, the philosophers of ancient Greece asked the question, what is everything made of? Thales answered that it's water. Anaximander said it's apeiron, Anaximenes air, Pythagoras numbers, Heraclitus fire, Empedocles the four elements, and Democritus atoms. Their interest was in the nature. That's why they're called natural philosophers. But Protagoras was interested in man, not the nature. He didn't care about questions such as what is everything made of. Man is the measure of all things. So to some people, everything could be water. To others, it could be fire. And still to others, it could be numbers. So what is the use of such question? The truth is subjective. That's why we can say Protagoras was the real philosopher. He was interested in men, not the nature. That is the defining difference between Protagoras and Democritus. People like Protagoras, who taught the rhetoric, are called sophists. While the word originally meant the wise, it has a negative connotation, meaning knowledge seller or even a deceiver. They denied the absolute truth and sold knowledge by playing on words. But was Protagoras really just a knowledge seller? In fact, Protagoras was really a wise man. But the problem is that all of Protagoras' writings have been burned. We can only try to speculate what it thought based on the records left by his posterity, and by records left by Plato, a student of Socrates at that. Plato made his teacher Socrates into a great thinker, but belittled Protagoras as a shallow knowledge seller. That's why you need to teach smart students. Let's wrap up. First, Protagoras was a representative sophist of ancient Greece. Sophists taught argumentation, rhetoric, and how to win arguments. Second, Protagoras said that man is the measure of all things. Perceptions and normative judgments depend on the person who says them. Every truth is subjective. Third, Protagoras can be said to be a real philosopher, because he was interested in the human world, not the natural world.